Bryan Keith Lash was born on July 7, 1987, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, to parents April and Bryan. In 2017, 29-year-old Bryan was living with his 25-year-old girlfriend, Noele Renee Trice, in Fort Wayne, along with their 2-year-old son. Bryan also had 2 daughters from a previous relationship. On Friday night, June 7, 2017, they had 6 friends over to watch the NBA Finals between Cleveland Cavaliers and the Golden State Warriors. A few people had also stopped by to buy some marijuana from Noele. The following day, Noele and Bryan failed to show up for a planned meetup at the New Haven Canal Days, and they were oddly not answering their phones. Concerned, a female friend and her mother went by their house and shockingly found both Bryan and Noele dead inside. They had been stabbed to death, and there was blood all over the home. Thankfully, Noele's mother, Kimberly Gomez, took their son with her that night so they could continue watching the game and having fun. Unbeknownst to the friend and her mother, they hadn't even been dead for an hour. Investigators, with the help of family friends, determined that a 50-inch TV, 3 pounds of marijuana, and a VCR were missing. As for Noele's cell phone, it was found in the hallway between the kitchen and the bedroom, and investigators were able to pull a partial palm print from it. One immediate person of interest was Dustin Neal, who had been at the house the night before. Dustin was brought in for an interview and didn't say much. However, a follow-up interview was conducted, and this time, he told investigators he had known Noele for about 20 years and was at her home on an almost daily basis. He also admitted that he was aware she had 2 to 3 pounds of high-grade marijuana in her house that night. He said he left around midnight, the same time Noele's mother left, and never returned. After leaving, he said he went to his mother's house and then to a friend's trailer that he had a key to. Once there, he smoked and had some drinks. The owner of the trailer came home at 3 a.m. after getting off work and confirmed that Neal was there. He then claims he left sometime between 7 and 9 a.m. However, a witness came forward and said that Dustin called twice a little after 8 a.m. in a frantic state of mind. Call logs back this up. Dustin called the witness to try and sell a large amount of marijuana and said he needed to get rid of it quickly because he had stolen it from a couple. The witness said it was 1 to 2 pounds of high-grade marijuana, just like Noele had. Investigators then obtained Dustin's cell phone records and found it pinged off a cell tower at 6:20 a.m. right near the victim's home. This proved, for one, that he had left the trailer way before 7 a.m. as he originally said. They then checked his palm print against the one found on Noele's phone, and it was a match. However, it was Dustin who sealed his own fate. A new witness came forward and told investigators that he actually bragged about committing the murders. He even thought it was funny that he got the knife stuck while attacking Noele and had to use his foot to get it out. Then another witness asked him if he was responsible for the murders, to which he responded, and I quote, "We are not going to talk about that." He then quickly followed that up with, and I quote, "I have 5 bodies under me." In July 2022, investigators learned that Dustin entered the home through a window, and once inside, he accidentally woke Bryan up. That's when he stabbed him. After Bryan and Noele were dead, he allegedly burned his clothes and buried them in a backyard somewhere. Finally, in January of 2023, Dustin was arrested and charged with their murders. In 2024, he was found guilty and sentenced to 142 years in prison. John Freeman Stagner was born on April 21, 1939. By 1992, 53-year-old John was married to Donna, living in Orange County, Florida, and working as a county maintenance worker. Their home was on the county's maintenance property, and he served as the live-in caretaker for the equipment there. Those who knew John described him as a very generous person who treated others with kindness. On the evening of August 9, 1992, John was called out to repair a power line that had come down during a storm. They slept in separate bedrooms in the summer because Donna preferred to sleep with the air conditioning and John didn't. So when he came home, Donna went off to her bedroom around 10:30 while he stayed up watching TV in the living room. She heard a noise around 2:30 a.m. but never got up to check. Around 5 a.m., she went to wake him up, but didn't turn on the light and noticed that his arm was cold to the touch. Concerned, she turned the light on and shockingly found him dead. An autopsy determined he had been brutally attacked and suffered blunt force trauma to his head and face. Even though DNA was in its early stages, investigators knew the importance of it and collected as much evidence as they could. They also found a walking stick at the scene, which they determined was the murder weapon. Clearly, someone had come into their home and attacked John while he slept. However, there was no evidence of a struggle or a break-in, but they did find his window open, and since the house was only one story, they figured the suspect entered that way. Since nothing was missing and John was the only victim, they weren't sure what the motive was. They began going through his life, trying to find anyone who might have had a reason to harm John. That's when they came across his friend Ronald Cates, who went by Ronnie. Ronnie was known for borrowing tools from John, and he was asked to return those tools not long before the murder. While they had fingerprints in the home that matched Ronnie, he was a frequent visitor, so they couldn't be certain he was their suspect. Ronnie and his family had even been homeless at one point, so John and Donna gave them a place to stay along with money and food. Strangely, when they went to talk to him, his daughter answered the door and seemed nervous and told investigators he wasn't home. They decided to stick around and eventually noticed a truck peel out of the driveway. They returned to the house, and the daughter admitted her father forced her to lie about him being home. When they finally tracked him down and brought him in for questioning, he gave several conflicting statements regarding his whereabouts on the night John was murdered. Plus, they felt that an innocent man wouldn't try and evade police. 3 years after John's murder, Ronnie tried to take his own life and was committed during a mental health crisis. While in the hospital, he confessed to killing a man in 1992, but also claimed to have killed several historical figures. Since he wasn't mentally stable, the confession wasn't enough to arrest him. The case would then go unsolved for another 27 years. In April 2022, Ronnie was in a hospital in North Carolina and confessed once again to a nurse that he had killed someone in Florida in 1992. He also told a security guard the same thing. Curiosity got the best of them, and they decided to research the murder he was talking about and stumbled on John's case. They then notified the police, who came and interviewed him. Investigators learned that Ronnie had a drug problem and would sell the tools he borrowed from John for drug money. After he failed to return the tools, he and John had a falling out. Frustrated that he couldn't get his tools back, he confronted Ronnie. They also learned that on the day of the murder, Ronnie was hiding under the house, waiting for his opportunity to strike. At that point, they had him extradited back to Florida, where he was hospitalized for a mental evaluation and finally charged with first-degree murder. Once he was arrested, his family, now safe from him, decided to finally reveal information they had kept secret all these years. His wife said that he was a very violent man who had abused drugs for years. She also said back in 1992 that she was the only one bringing in money to the home because of Ronnie's drug abuse. While the kindness of the Stagner family was not lost on her, and she desperately wanted the case to be solved, she was terrified of her husband. She always believed her husband murdered John and said that the night it occurred, he didn't return home until the early morning hours. When he finally showed up, to her shock, his clothes were all covered in blood. They also interviewed his adult children, and one of them said they remembered him asking her to hide a bunch of his clothes under the house. Days later, she was asked to go get them, and then he burned them. Ronnie has since provided investigators with several details, including how he murdered John. I wasn't able to find out if he's been sentenced yet, but it's possible he's in a mental facility. Larry Gosser was born in Somerset, Kentucky on April 14, 1951. Larry went on to become a sergeant with the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife. By the spring of 2024, he was a retired father of 5, living with his wife, 50-year-old Angela, who went by Angie, in Russell Springs, Kentucky. Larry was described as a kind man who was always very friendly to others. He and Angie were enjoying the country life, but she unfortunately suffered from mental health issues and had stopped taking her medicine. This would ultimately lead to a horrible tragedy. Before we dive into that, we have to go back to 2009, when Angie's mental health really took a toll on her family. That year, Angie and Larry began going through a divorce due to her mental health issues. Larry also filed an order seeking emergency custody of their 14-year-old son. Unfortunately, Angie also had a history of abusing prescription medications and had been hospitalized after she threatened to take her life on multiple occasions. During the divorce proceedings, Larry accused her of throwing parties at the house and allowing underage children to drink. Their teenage daughter, Amanda, also got dragged into this mess after Angie threatened her not to say anything about the things she had done. She even sent her daughter text messages calling her a bitch and saying she would stomp her ass. With no other options, Amanda took out a protective order against her mother. In the custody case, the judge ultimately sided with Larry, but by 2010, the two had reconciled and they slowly became a family again. However, in 2024, her mental health issues would rear their ugly head again, but this time, 3 people would be dead. On Friday, May 3, 2024, at 6:30 p.m., Larry was found in the front yard of their home, shot to death by Angie. After that, Angie began driving to her brother Daryl's house, but while on the way, she spotted her sister, Jennifer. She began chasing Jennifer and fired multiple shots through Jennifer's passenger side door, killing her instantly. Once she arrived at Daryl's house, she shot him twice, but he was able to defend himself and returned fire, killing her. Thankfully, Daryl survived the gunshot wounds. In the end, Daryl's actions were ruled self-defense, and he was not charged with the crime, but now the family is left to pick up the pieces of losing 3 loved ones. Carol Louis Valenzuela was born in Minnesota on December 30th, 1955, to parents William and Barbara. By the summer of 1974, 18-year-old Carol was married to Robert Eugene Valenzuela and living in Camas, Washington, with their 10-month-old twins. On August 2nd, Carol decided to hitchhike the 15 miles to Vancouver, Washington. Sadly, Robert and her twins would never see her alive again. 2 days later, when she failed to return, he reported her missing. On October 12, 1974, a group of hunters stumbled upon 2 sets of remains in a densely wooded area of Dole Valley near Vancouver. The first victim was quickly identified as Carol. They went to question Robert, but he had unfortunately overdosed on aspirin and was in the hospital recovering. After recovering, he was arrested, but eventually was released after passing a polygraph test. The other remains discovered would then go unidentified for the next 41 years. The Jane Doe was estimated to be around 20 to 25 years old and had been dead for around 2 weeks. Unfortunately, due to the decomposition, they were unable to determine a cause of death. A reconstruction of her was created and published in newspapers, but it never led to her identification. In 1977, after being unable to identify her, the remains were archived. The remains went missing until 2011, when the operations manager at the Clark County Medical Examiner's Office discovered the bones had been mislabeled as belonging to Carol. In 2012, after finding the bones, a DNA profile was developed, and they were finally able to identify her as 17-year-old Martha Marie Morrison. Martha was born in the 1950s in Eugene, Oregon, and grew up in foster care. Unfortunately, she began using drugs and running away from home. She also kept in touch with her biological family. At some point, she left to join the Job Corps program in Arizona. There, she met a man, and they rented an apartment together. She even brought this man back to Eugene at some point to meet her family. On September 1st, 1974, 6 weeks before her body was found, she strangely disappeared. It was reported that she and her boyfriend had gotten into a nasty argument right before she went missing. Investigators wanted to question him, but they had no clue who he was. So, in 2016, they made an appeal to the public for help in identifying him, not because he was a suspect, but in hopes he could shed some light on the case. Finally, in 2017, they got the break they were looking for when Martha's DNA was found on an air pistol that serial killer Warren Forrest used to torture 20-year-old Krista K. Blake. Forrest had been a longtime suspect in the case, along with a couple of other serial killers. As for the air gun, it was found in a footlocker in his van in October 1974 when he was arrested for the murder of Krista. In 1978, he was found guilty of Krista's murder and sentenced to life in prison. In January 2020, Forrest was charged with Martha's murder. Norma Lewis, a victim of Forrest who survived, testified during the trial that he offered her a ride home, but instead drove her into the woods of Tukes Mountain, where he tried to kill her. Thankfully, she was able to escape and led the police back to the scene of the crime. When investigators scoured the area, they found Krista's body buried in a shallow grave less than 200 feet away. It's believed that his first victim was Jamie Rochelle Grissom, who disappeared after leaving school in 1971. Her ID was later discovered along a remote road in Clark County. To this day, she has never been found. He's also a suspect in the 1974 disappearance of Diane Gilchrist. In February 2023, Forrest was found guilty of Martha's murder. Investigators believe Forrest is responsible for the deaths of at least 7 women, and family members are hoping one day he will reveal the location of his other victims. While he hasn't been convicted for the murder of Carol, he is considered the prime suspect. On January 29, 2010, in Clarksville, Tennessee, David Champagne accidentally hit the mailbox of William Campbell, who went by Bill, and his wife Ina. He tried to call and let them know, but they strangely didn't answer. Concerned, he reached out to a neighbor who had a key to their house, and upon entering, they shockingly found them shot to death in their bed. The house had also been ransacked, appearing like the murders were the result of a burglary gone wrong. Bill and Ina had been married for many years and adopted a baby boy who they named William Roger Campbell. After their untimely deaths, William Jr., who went by Roger, quickly became a person of interest. However, he claimed they were still alive when he left the house that morning at 7 o'clock. Roger lived out of town, but had been in town visiting his parents. Investigators searched the home for clues and found a medicine log that Ina kept. Interestingly, it abruptly stopped on the 27th. They began to believe that Bill and Ina had been dead for a couple of days before being found. That theory was given even more credit after finding Bill's newspapers from the 28th and 29th still in the mailbox. Since Roger was the last one to see them alive, it only made sense that he was a person of interest. He also didn't help his case by telling investigators multiple inconsistencies and by the fact that he wasn't being very cooperative. He then did something that shocked everyone. He had his parents cremated, something that Bill and Ina were very much against because they wanted to be buried right next to each other. Unfortunately, they didn't have the physical evidence to tie Roger to the crime, and the case would go unsolved for the next 11 years. In 2021, the case was looked at again, and they realized that Roger's ex-wife Linda had not been thoroughly interviewed. Linda told them that on January 26, 2010, 3 days before Bill and Ina's bodies were discovered, Roger came by her work at Fort Campbell and had Ina with him. This was strange, considering they hadn't seen or spoken to each other in almost 13 years. He told her that he would be leaving town again on the 28th. It was almost as if he was setting up some sort of alibi. Investigators then determined that he stood to gain $180,000 from his parents' estate once they were dead. It turns out that Roger had been a plague on the family for years and could never maintain a good relationship with anyone. In 1989, he was convicted for embezzlement. Then in 1990, he violated his probation after cashing a fraudulent check. Apparently, he had a thing for money and would do anything to get it. Now, investigators had a motive: money. They presented the circumstantial evidence to a grand jury to review, and they subsequently indicted him. In July 2021, investigators tracked him down in Georgia, where he lived, and arrested him for the murder of his parents. He was then extradited back to Tennessee. Roger's son, Sean, spoke very highly of his grandparents, but didn't have many nice things to say about his father. He basically confirmed that his father had been a plague for years and said that anyone who had let Roger into their lives was left with only horror stories to tell. On January 23, 2023, 13 years after Bill and Ina's murder, Roger was found guilty and given 2 life sentences to be served consecutively. It's believed that Roger waited until his parents were asleep and hooked up to their oxygen before he executed them. He then staged the house to look like a burglary gone wrong. After his conviction, they asked Sean how he felt about it, to which he responded, and I quote, "I've been waiting 35 years to say F you, and the jury did it for me."